So the reason we annotate our works cited is because we're trying to document our third outcome skill in the course, the ability to evaluate sources and resources in research. And we show that skill and we develop that skill through the process of evaluating and annotating the resources we use in our papers and discussion forums, etc. So we're not talking here about correct citations, things like the things that we've been talking about in terms of the technical, mechanical formatting of your works cited citations. Stuff like having it in proper MLA format, having a mix of the right kind of sources, making sure the titles of anything that's from the web are live web links. Those are all things that have been covered already. And if they're not, if I didn't comment on them, I missed something, you need to take care of that. What we want to focus on here is something different, which is what are the highest academic and professional standards for sources and how can we apply them? Now, this has already been explained in my lecture on using and evaluating sources, the web lecture, but I wanted to take a stab at walking you through it in the oral setting of a video lecture. So these are the same 4 criteria that I used in that web lecture, A, B, C, and D, and you can see that they range from currency of the source to the expertise and scholarship of the writer, to the connection to the larger intellectual conversation via footnotes and bibliographies, and finally, the minimization of bias. Nobody has no bias. Everybody has some bias and perspective, but the more a source works to limit that, to qualify it, to complicate it, the more credible it is. So these are the 4 criteria that you're going to be applying to your own sources. And when your sources meet these criteria, you're going to explain how you know that. What is it about the source that matches this criteria? What does it have that shows us it meets this standard? And when your source doesn't meet the standard, then you're going to explain how it doesn't, how it falls short, and ultimately why, despite this, you're still using it. The reality is very few sources meet all 4 of these standards. And so often we're talking about a source that has strengths in 1 or 2 of these areas and weaknesses in 1 or 2 of these areas. And understanding and being able to explain those strengths and weaknesses gives us as a writer more credibility with our reader, and also helps the reader understand why a source with those kind of limitations is still being used. So let's look at the rubric criteria. The first thing we want to make sure is that we have that element of evaluation, those sentences of evaluation in each of our annotated citations, and we also want to get to the how and why. A reader might use the source and why the writers included it, especially if it doesn't meet those highest standards. Now, remember, and this is again language from the rubric, quality counts here. And so if all of your work is just on the web, if you don't go beyond the web and anonymous sources on the web to some credible academic sources like books or databases or scholarly journals, then your research is not going to meet the minimum requirements for this assignment. In other words, it can't just all be anonymous web stuff. It needs to be credible. Some of your sources need to be credible, and if not meeting all the highest academic and professional standards, some of them. And to do that, you're going to have to move beyond the web to databases, books, scholarly journals, etc. Let's take a look at some of the ways Megan takes this on. First of all, in her paper, she does use a scholarly website, but she uses one composed by a college professor. And so it has a special credibility. And this is what I mean by going beyond simple web use and using random anonymous sources like dictionaries and encyclopedias that are online, but don't tell you who wrote them and when, or Wikipedia, which we've talked about the problematics of that before and why we can't use that in a paper where we're trying to show our highest level research. So this is a good example of using a website that has a high level of credibility, and there's a really nice evaluation here and explanation of what can be culled from this site. Megan also uses a library database, which is a wonderful approach, especially to supplementing historical information or knowledge. And I have actually, if you go back, you'll see that I fleshed out some of this information about how to use the library resources. And I also give an example of using the Oxford reference resources, which can be really valuable, especially the American History guide. So this is an example of someone using something that's on the web but meets higher level professional and academic qualifications because it's a library database composed by scholars evaluated by librarians. Let's take a look at another higher level resource that Megan uses. She actually uses an article from a book, and that is a wonderful resource because books are published by companies that hire experts to evaluate the quality of an author's book. It's researched by fact checkers. It's checked by editors of the company. So often books, especially books from scholarly presses like this, have very high credibility. And Megan's use of this alternative kind of source, something that takes us beyond simple and easy web searches, is a good example of the kind of thing you can do too. So now it's your turn. As you're working on annotating and evaluating your sources, remember to use all the resources I've given you. The web lecture on using and evaluating sources, the rubric for paper 1, the sample for paper 1, and this video. Rewatch this video if you need to go over some of those examples that I moved through pretty quickly. What you want to do here is show your reader that you understand the highest academic and professional standards. Imagine you're working with a supervisor at work and you want to show him or her that you're capable of really quality high-level research. You're not going to just go to Wikipedia and come back and say, hey, I found this stuff on Wikipedia, because that shows you did nothing, that you did the easiest thing, the least critically thinking oriented thing. No, we want to show people we can function at a high level so that we can demonstrate that we have that skill set for ourselves, obviously for me, your instructor, but beyond that, for potential employers and upper level instructors. We want to have that skill. It's a vital workplace skill, and we want to hold ourselves to the higher standard, which means we really want to evaluate our sources and explain our evaluation so that a reader can see we get this. We understand these criteria. We know how to apply them, and we know how to work with texts that don't fully meet them all because we understand what those limitations mean and what we can still gather from a text that has those limitations. All right, I'm always available to help. Phone, text, email, any Camel, whatever works, any kind of communication. See you in Blackboard.